So, welcome to this episode, this installation of our Artist Conversation series, Impact Music, Media, and Culture, where we talk to the artists behind the music and get inside their heads. Welcome to the conversation, Dr. Donny Jackson, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And one of the reasons why it's such a pleasure is because I just love our regular conversations. And
Yeah.
so this is an opportunity to have people kind of peek into, how we talk to each other all the time. What have you been up to the last 3 or 4 months? Tell the people.
Wow. Well, I'm writing all the time, so that's a constant every month. I give myself a project every year, kind of a boot camp for writing, and I'm the drill instructor. you know.
Oh, so you have to you have to have discipline.
Yeah, yeah. So every year I give myself a different project. Last year it was to write and post 100 poems in the year, and this year it's 200 poems that I've pledged to write and post.
But
A
that's
bit off a
crazy.
lot. It is crazy, and I realized it when I got to 100, but I was past the halfway point in the year because I didn't get. July is roughly the halfway point,
Yeah.
and I hadn't done 100 poems yet. I'm over 100 poems now, but I still got a lot of poems
You
to
got a
write
lot left to
between.
go.
Yeah,
Mhm. So,
which is part of the boot camp of it. It's a self-imposed pressure.
but what would I mean? You are prolific with words. So, you know, is that something that you do for yourself to kind of, um, I don't know, just trigger your social media algorithm, or are you doing it
Oh,
so that you get your thoughts out?
it's really to keep me fit and alert as a writer. It's really not for the social media of it. I
Mhm.
only I only post stuff that I'm happy with,
Right.
and so it's not just for the volume of it. It's really I'm trying to be a better writer all the time, and I've been
Gotcha.
at it. I've been at it all my life, but I'm never going to be done. And so
So sharpening
this
your knife.
this is sharpening a knife. This is CrossFit. This is however you want to put it.
All right, cross.
It is to keep me is to keep me writing and to make me better at it. I
Gotcha.
don't think I'll ever be as good as I want to be, and so I give myself these challenges.
When did you discover that you had a gift with words, with writing?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, it was somebody else who discovered it actually when I was 8. I had a teacher who entered one of my poems in a citywide poetry contest when I was 8, and I won a prize. So I am a prize-winning poet, Thornell,
Yes.
and I won $2.
Oh, yeah.
So two crisp $1 bills was my prize, and she continued to encourage me to write. And so at that point, I realized that as a storyteller, there were things that I could do with words, and I was a
Right.
super shy child, a super shy teenager
Mm.
as well, and so it was a haven. And
Yes.
so I other people's reaction to it gave me a sense that I had some facility with it,
Mhm.
and so that was part of it. And at some point, and this was much later, when I felt like I had developed a voice, I felt like, yeah, this is something that I can keep at, and I'm good enough at it that I'll continue to work at it and be better. And ideally, people will like it, and people seem to respond to it.
I posed a question, and I'm kind of intuitive with it, but when you say develop a voice, what does that mean for you?
Oh, I want to sound like me. I don't want to sound like anybody else. And in the world of poetry, and specifically spoken word, since that's what we're talking about here. Spoken word is largely performed publicly,
Right.
and in forums where people get a chance to hear each other live. And I'm talking about pre-COVID, and and now
Sure.
kind of post pandemic. So there's a genre of poetry where people perform it live, and some people perform it live competitively, and those are called slams. It's not
Right.
something that I do,
Mm.
and so that that's a big open uh, uh, genre
Mhm.
now, and so that's an area that I think has put people on poetry and given people a sense of that it's out there, and so that's a world where I've been able to navigate
Right.
and have a sense of things. But to your point, you also get a sense that when you're watching other poets, there can be trends in terms of
Yes.
performance. There can be trends in terms of tone, in terms of language, in terms of subject matter,
Hmm.
and uh, and I don't want to be a part of the party line of it. So finding my voice as a writer has been
Right.
very important. And even outside of spoken word, look, my
Sure.
favorite writer of anything is Toni Morrison
Ah,
still. And so at some point I stopped writing because I was reading Toni Morrison. I'm like, I can't do that. It's
right.
like I,
Right.
I'm bereft. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And so at some point, because I love words and I love the storytelling of it, I told myself, look, you got to figure out who you are.
Right.
And if, it's not going to be Toni Morrison. She's done
Right.
that. She's doing that as good as that can be done. And so you got to find you. And so that's part of the boot camp of it. So I can just figure out how I sound that is, very different, ideally, from how other people sound, because they're doing their best them. And so great. That's already covered. I don't need to sound like them. Even if I have people that I admire, I don't want to sound like them. I
Yeah.
want to sound like me and be inspired by their creativity and craft, but not be a mimic.
And it's so interesting because um, being on the music side of things for so long, and even at one point in my life being an aspiring musician myself, aspiring singer myself, um, that idea of finding your own voice is a little bit more literal um, in when you're a singer.
Hmm.
Um, people always, oh, he's the new Luther Vandross or whatever, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you like that, and then you don't, because where are you in that statement? If
Yeah.
you're compared to that other person, that legendary person, you definitely want to be inspired by, and even people to kind of learn what your influences are. I remember when Kem first came out, people were
Hmm.
like, "Oh, he was obviously influenced by Al Jarreau." You know, he's doing Al Jarreau. And I was just like, it was funny because I think in the beginning he was almost like, "No, I never even listened to Al Jarreau," and I was just like,
Hmm.
you must be lying." I was literally there when they met for the first time at the
Oh
Love
wow,
Festival. That was crazy.
that's
Um,
legends. Yeah.
yeah, it was in Al growing up was one of my absolute favorites, and
Hmm.
I didn't. Now I can tell that story because I remember I would write and sing songs and stuff, and people would say to me, "Oh, you remind me of Al Jarreau," and I'm like, "Who is Al Jarreau?" And then
Hmm.
they turned me on to the All Fly Home album, at which
Oh
point I was just like,
yeah,
"Oh, I
come
don't
on.
mind being told that I sound like him."
Yeah, that's not bad as a
And I
comparison.
became a huge fan.
Yeah,
So
no,
finding your
I love Al Jarreau to this day, and
yeah,
have all the early stuff.
I forgot how good. I listened to Live at London a couple months ago, and I was
Hmm.
God, amazing. Absolutely. Did
Yeah,
you have music in the home growing up? Did you have
I
like
did, I did, and I thank my parents every day in my head for that influence, and I grew up with the best of both worlds. My dad was listening to jazz, especially on Sundays when he was ironing his post office uniform shirts for the week. And but my mom, who had her teenage sisters living with us, they were listening to Motown. So
yeah,
I had this amazing amalgam of sounds, and so I listened to a lot of music, and my parents took us to live shows. So I saw some of the legends in concert because it's working class family. It's not like we went on vacations,
Right.
overseas or did fancy things in that regard. But they did invest in us seeing people live, like Luther Vandross, like Marvin Gaye, like James Brown. So I saw legends live, and so music is woven into my spirit, and in some ways I feel like it influences me as a performer for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
As a reader of words for sure.
Mhm. Mhm. And when it's funny because when I read your poems, I I kind of perform them in my head if I
That's
with
cool.
try to get the cadence right and things of that nature, put
Yeah,
the emphasis in the right place and stuff like that.
yeah.
And in doing that, I think it helps the words jump off the page for me. And
Mhm.
that's why sometimes I'll hit you on me like, woo wee, that was because I've already performed it for
Yeah,
myself
I
when
love that.
yeah, just awesome, awesome work.
I
I,
appreciate it.
I got to be honest, or transparent or whatever they saying these
Yeah.
days. I always knew that you were a poet.
Hmm.
I don't know if I ever saw you perform live,
Hmm.
uh, but I always knew that you were a poet, and I always knew that you had similar music taste to me for the people.
Oh yeah, yeah.
One day, I went to a show, and Donny Jackson's there, and I'm like, "Hey, Donny!" Da da da. We're like, "Okay." 2 days later, we went to another show. I was just like, "Hey, you're here again." Then I fly across the country in New York, right? Was it New York?
That's my favorite. Yeah, Joe's Pub.
Joe's Pub. And here he is again. And I was just like, at that point, it was at that point I knew that we were kindred spirits.
Absolutely.
And I wasn't a fan. I just knew that you were cool people and you had taste or
Yeah.
similar, I'll just say similar taste.
Yeah.
Uh, so when I finally, became more familiar with your poetry and, and you put out Boy, that was so heavy for me. Um, it was such a awesome um, collection,
Thank you.
and that's when I really became uh, I began to appreciate you in that regard.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, it's I always like to surround myself with smart people, but like there were people who were smart and then just kind of piss away their intelligence, and
Yeah.
here you are taking and putting your lens on you know culture. And that's what this is all about. This whole impact, series is called Impact: Music,
Hmm.
Media, and Culture, and it's about how you know the music and the media reflect culture,
Yeah.
magnify it, dissect it, highlight, and so that's what your poems are.
That is
That's
my
what.
goal. My goal is to not have answers, but really to show how I'm thinking about the question because I
Yeah.
don't have answers. I'm trying to metabolize the situation, whether it be, you know, black trans women being killed at an alarming rate, or whether it be trying to make sure that I'm still holding on to joy in the midst of the George Floyds and Mike Browns and so on. It's important to me to just kind of communicate that. Because the hope is that somebody else has a better answer than I do, or at least can form the question in their own way, and eventually propagate that through the culture, and maybe somebody will figure it out. But I feel like I have to be kind of a witness at least.
A witness, and I think it's important for you to challenge people to ask the questions because so many people are caught up in their own bag and you know don't challenge themselves to get outside of that bag, and then here you are, you know really taking on the tough stuff. you know that there's a poem you did about Breonna Taylor that just had me bawling.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
called
then,
Camera. Yeah.
yes, and then here it is 2 years later, we find out the truth
Yeah.
about the forged warrants and all this stuff. And it's just like,
Ugly.
it's the ugliest thing, the underbelly. Oh my goodness, I'm getting emotional thinking about
No, it's hideous. It's hideous. And so yeah, that poem was, yeah, that poem was important to me. Like I don't have any answers about that situation, but I definitely want to call out some stuff. You know, I think it's important to call out some stuff, and not in the holier than thou way. Look,
it.
I'm as imperfect as they come, um, but I embrace that, and I'm willing to be called out. If somebody wants to challenge me on that, I appreciate the conversations. You know,
Right.
But yeah, I feel like the thing that I'm put on earth to do is tell stories in such a way that moves people, whether it
Right.
be in the direction they're already going, in terms of celebrating love and joy, or going against the grain, where there are certain things that are tough conversations to have.
Right.
Um, so yeah.
So you won an award last year, some recognition for your book. I can't remember which one it was.
Oh yeah, Kirkus Reviews named Boy as one of the best indie books of 2021. Thank you, and
And
that was
well deserved. So well
oh,
deserved. As a black
thank
man in
you.
America, I just, your lens was so in alignment with my experience that I really loved that book. And so it was wonderful when you shared that with me last year. Like I said in the beginning, you're a prolific writer, and you shared you're writing 200 poems and everything. Tell us about your new collection that just came out.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. So this is my third spoken word poetry album, and it's called "An Act of War on My Belief in Death." And so it's a little wordy title, but it's actually a line from one of the poems in the album itself. So it's meta. But the summary, I guess, is that, and what I hinted at before, trying to hold on to joy and love in the midst of all of these hellish things. So that's kind of the reason for being of the album. So I want to talk about some of the hellish things. So that's part of it, and I want to talk about some of the joyful things in the world. And I'm trying to talk about the struggle of holding on to joy in the midst of those troubling things. So it's a reflection on all three parts of that. Because Boy definitely is ripped from the headlines, and it is heavy, and it is sometimes tough subject matter. Um, and then but it's important to live. It's important to love. It's important to be optimistic. And I found myself challenged when I looked at my work. I was like, dude, this is sad and depressing, and true in terms of my point of view as a witness, for sure. But it's also true that I'm dedicated to love. I'm dedicated to joy. I'm dedicated. I really believe that the world is mostly good, and that people are mostly good most of the time, and that the window into human lives is often the news or sometimes social media. And so it's easy to kind of cherry pick all the bad news because that's what gets the most attention.
Right.
You don't see news stories about people loving their newborn child because that's normal. Because of course you do. So that's not going to sell soap. So we don't see it, and so because we don't see it, sometimes we think it's not happening
Right.
in the same proportions. And
Yes.
I think we have to be careful in terms of how information comes at us.
Yes.
Hell, when you hear about shark attacks, it seems like all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of shark attacks. No, it's a whole bunch of shark attacks are pretty consistent, but the news isn't consistent in terms of their coverage of shark attacks.
Right.
And so when the news starts to cover them more, you think there are more shark attacks. And so you're
Right.
more afraid to get in the water.
Right.
So the same with war, and the same with, with all kinds of terrible things that happen. And yes, the frequency at which Black boys are shot is horrible, um, but there's still an important element of life to hold on to. Yes, that it is hard to carry the weight of that on my shoulder on any given day, and still want to love, you know. But the alternative for me is giving up and succumbing to the gravity of it. I'm unwilling to do that, and so this
And
album
I'm
is about
glad to
being
hear.
unwilling to succumb to the gravity of it.
And I, and when true, I mean, having read, the vast, part of the poems in both boy and girl, this was a nice departure. It still started out heavy, and then I was like, oh, and then these wonderful, or cello transitions were like, oh, that's really really nice. It added a whole level of um, I don't know. I'll just use the word artistry, but I really,
Mhm.
it was just a nice way to kind of, um, I'll just use the word release
Mhm.
between the pieces. You
Yeah,
know,
well, I'm glad. I'm glad it lands that way.
how did you, what was your decision to go in that direction in terms of interludes?
The cello is my favorite classical instrument, and the reason for that is because it has a voice to me. The cello feels like a voice, unlike some other instruments. I love the piano too, but it doesn't sound like a voice to me.
Mhm.
It's beautiful, but the cello sounds human to
Yeah.
me, uh, and it sounds like the kind of human that I aspire to be. That level of
Okay.
fluidity, that level of depth, that level of warmth, and in some cases that level of pathos or gravitas. So it has, just like all of us do, a multiplicity of possibilities. And so I wanted to uh, enhance my own voice with just kind of an intro that kind of prepared us for
Mhm.
for me talking about stuff. Um,
Right.
and so rather than having somebody else do that, because Girl has a woman's voice on it, Annie Gonzalez, lovely and amazing performer. But I wanted to try something different. And because I love the cello so much, and because I thought it would be a nice way of just preparing, just kind of setting the tone, a nice little appetizer for what people were about to hear.
I think it works brilliantly. Did you
Lovely.
play any instruments growing up, or did you just
I
listen
did
to it?
not, you know what, and you know, I regret that to this day. My parents got me piano lessons, and like 2 weeks in, I was like, I am not, I'm not playing the piano yet. I
It's
was
right,
so
exactly.
impatient
It's
because I
too
thought I
hard.
was going to be able to get it. Somebody would kind of break the code for me, and I'd be able to get down, like Ramsey Lewis, just
Woo,
to
rest in
just to
peace. One of my
rest in
absolute
peace. Yeah, no, I thought I should give him a shout out. But yeah, that's part of the music I grew up with. And but no, so that was a bust. And I have a keyboard sitting in one of my bedrooms right now, haunting me and plaguing me. Try it, learn something, do it. So who knows? One of these days.
I have a feeling that you will. I mean, they say that something about not being able to teach an old dog new tricks. I think that's BS. I
Yeah,
think
I agree with you.
my well, cello to me was like my second favorite. Um, I actually grew up, um, eh, same kind of experience with you. At a certain point, my father was like, "Oh, take piano lessons," and I
Mhm.
did that for a couple years and stuff. But in school, we had the orchestra program, and I started out playing violin. And
Oh,
then I discovered the viola.
oh, there you go.
The viola is an alto voice, and
Hmm.
that is like my favorite voice is the alto
I
voice.
totally get that.
And so the head of the music department, Mr. Horner, was a viola player, and so he would give me private lessons. And the head of the orchestra at our school was so mad at him for giving me this extra attention, and I was just like, Well, I'm a viola player. He's a viola player. It was like he
Yeah,
was passing
of
down the
course.
knowledge. And eventually, I actually ended up becoming second chair in the Westchester County All County Orchestra.
Okay.
And they were very intrigued by the fact that I played viola when I went to school. And they wanted me to play in the orchestra. But, after putting the viola down for 6 months, I was just like, I couldn't sight read. And they're like, well, practice
Mm-hmm.
some and come back. I was just like, it was a phase that I went through. And it is only now that I look back and I go, why'd you put that down? Because, you know, the viola, the cello, such beautiful instruments with unique voices. And if you know how to play it, you communicate in a completely different way.
Yeah.
One of my favorite aunts played cello, and
Mm.
I think that's one of the reasons why I liked her so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Well, this is new information. I did not know this about you, and I'm happy to know it. And I'm going to encourage you to go listen to some Lee England and some Regina Carter, so you can get some strings back in your blood, and maybe you'll pick up that viola.
well, the crazy thing about what you just said is I do need to experience Regina Carter, but Lee England Jr. is now my new client.
He's the
So
truth.
I get to
Um,
hear him every day.
yeah, Lee is
He's
dope.
brilliant.
I met him years ago, and it's one of my aspirations still to work with him.
Well, we're gonna figure out how to make that happen because I know he'd love to work with you too. You're both
Yeah.
very, very intelligent black men, and I think you would get along very well if
Oh
you
no, no,
went.
we. I think I told you that story, that impromptu time that we did work
Oh yes,
together
yes.
on Venice Beach. So yeah, I would love to return to that kind of energy, that kind of harmony between us.
Yeah, no, he's really quite remarkable. We were just chatting today. He's got a record that's submitted in best traditional R&B performance, and it's literally 4 minutes and 44 seconds of symphonic soul. It is so delicious. Like
I'm
that's
in.
yeah, definitely you want to check it out.
I am
Um,
in.
when you think about the legacy that you want to leave for the people who don't really know all of your gifts, you are a two-time Emmy winning Emmy winner, yes,
Yeah.
and so you have a whole uh, repertoire that is in visual medium. And now you have these albums and you have your performances. When you think about your legacy and people looking at your work when you transition to the next realm, what do you want that to be?
Poetry is actually my first love, and so I I absolutely want to be remembered as a storyteller,
Mm-hmm.
but particularly a storyteller who loved words.
Yeah.
You know, the Emmy stuff is fantastic. And by the way, also an NAACP Image Award winner for Unsung. Happy to be
That's
proud of.
right.
Um, but those were late adoptions, in my creative life, and I love them and I embrace them, and I work very very hard at telling stories in that way. Um, but at my core, I am a storyteller, and words are my most cherished medium. You know,
The
and I want to be
crazy,
remembered for being somebody who was dedicated to that.
well, I'm here to tell you, you have proven that to me year after year, poem after poem. It is challenging yourself to write 100 poems a year is uh, it's crazy.
It's yeah, yes, yes.
But now you're on
And
this quest for 200, brother. I hope you make it. Just because you set the goal, and I always want people to reach their goals.
yeah,
But yeah,
I have
it's
always kept my promises to myself in that regard. But full transparency. At some point, I was like, "Bruh, what have you done? Why you have bitten off so much here?" And so this is the hardest year And I've been doing these challenges every year for years,
Mhm.
for over a decade. Um, and this is the hardest one, because of the hubris, the
Yes.
arrogance that I could do 200 poems. So we'll see.
Well,
And I'm dedicated to all the poems, being as good as I can make them in the time that I have.
right. And that's really what it is. Um, what is that saying about don't let great be the enemy of good?
Yeah.
Where you get paralyzed because it's not good enough or whatever. No, invariably into the uh, land. What is it? Land on the moon. But you shoot
Hmm.
stars, then you're in a good place.
Yeah.
Um, I've always, I never said to myself, "Oh, God, that was a bad one."
Oh, I appreciate that.
I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, no, no."
Yeah. And I appreciate that, but I also, look, I'm realistic. I understand that there's no literally zero work. There's not a single work of art that everybody likes. I get, and
And
that
you want
and
what? That's right. That
and
is
it's
absolutely
and that's okay. Not everybody likes the Mona Lisa. Not everybody likes John Coltrane. Not every, you know what I mean? So it's fine. It's fine. And so I'm not going for everybody. I'm going for the people who will like it. you know.
yeah.
Uh,
One for the people who love words. I
yeah.
mean, it's funny because growing up, and this may be a little bit unusual to hear, my dad didn't let us watch TV
Hmm.
for the most part, mostly because, well, I don't know what the whole thing. He called it the idiot box, but the only time he let it in his home would let us watch TV was when there were other black people on the
Hmm. I understand.
then but then of course like in the summertime we would go visit my grandparents and that that was where I learned about Bewitched and Leave, and Leave It to Beaver and other
Yeah.
and the Brady Bunch and other shows. um, but it was the alternative was reading, so I
Hmm.
learned to love words too,
Yeah.
you know whether it was poetry, whether it was science fiction. And I used to write short stories,
Hmm.
and so I appreciate the written word. And so your passion and love for the written word and poetry, um, it kind of inspires me to think, maybe I should do that again. I don't know. I think my problem is I've not had anything to say. At least I didn't think I had anything to say, because poetry can come off as being profound, you know, and I perhaps I don't think of myself as somebody who has anything profound to say.
Yeah. I would let yourself off the hook of that kind of pressure. You know,
Hmm.
speaking your truth is the thing. Because here's the thing: there are plenty of people who are wordsmiths, but
Yeah,
if you're not telling the truth with those words, it doesn't matter how crafty you
yeah,
are. It's not going to reach people in the same way.
right. That's true.
Versus, I'll just give you an example. You've been moved by 3-year-olds, you know, who don't have a lot of vocabulary yet, but they're
Hmm.
telling the truth,
Yeah,
with the words that they have.
right,
They're passionate about, wanting that juice, and you believe
right.
them, at the time. And the other thing is that, look, uh, because we're talking about spoken word poetry, and sometimes poets get a little precious about, oh, I'm a page poet, I'm literary. The first poems were spoken; they weren't written down.
Yes, they weren't
You
written down.
know,
Right.
they were spoken out loud. And so, some of this orthodoxy about certain forms of poetry being better than others. Uh,
Right.
that's balderdash. It's ridiculous. So yeah, I'm glad that there's a category that's specifically for spoken word poetry albums, because that's actually going back to the source. This is where all poetry began, with people speaking out loud to each other and
Right.
trying to move them
Yep.
with the economy of words
Yep.
beautifully. That's what this is all about. And so, for the
I
first time in human history, there will be 5 poets, no matter who they are, nominated for this album, this category. It's
I
fantastic.
got to tell you, I'm tickled pink. It's been something that I've been lobbying for and passionate about. giving these spoken word poets a lane to be in and to, dare I say, magnify their work. And that's what happens when you have a Grammy category that's dedicated to
Yeah.
a certain genre. That's absolutely what happens. I, of course, there was always, sonnets and poems and things that when I
Mhm.
was growing up. But my first exposure to like um, spoken word poetry came. I was in college, and a friend of mine, Robert Mignot. We would have these uh, talent shows or whatever like that, and he got up there and he he um, he spoke this I guess the word would be recited this poem, and I just remember the leading line was, "I'm gonna burn it to the ground,"
Mm.
and I was just like, "Whoa, what is
Yeah.
he?"
What a opening.
Right? I'm gonna burn it to the ground. I was like, "Ooh," and he went on
Got
and
your
on.
attention.
He definitely got my attention. And so, like somewhere in my storage, someplace, I have this green notebook, this green cloth brown notebook with some of my poetry, and I was
Mm.
emulating his militant style, if you would. And I just go back and I read that stuff. I'm like, "Woo, where's all that coming from?"
Yeah. Yeah. But
And
however you decide to do it, whenever you decide to do it, whoever you decide to tell it to, tell your story, and it may not be poetry. It may be you on the viola at some point, telling your story that
okay,
way emotionally. But I
hmm,
but I think I think one of the beautiful things that distinguishes humans from animals is our ability. One of the many things, of course, but is our ability to tell stories, and that it's wired in our DNA to communicate with others our
right,
emotional experience in order to cause an emotional experience in them. That's a
hmm,
miraculous
that
combination
really
of
is.
things. You know, it's because it's something beyond. It's something beyond the need of it. Food, shelter, sex. You know what I mean? We don't need it, but it's so enduring that it feels like we do.
Mm,
We wouldn't name it as one of the things that you need to survive, because yes, you could stay alive without poetry. I'm
mhm,
here to tell you. um, but what's the quality of that life? There's something about the quality of life when you experience another human being's experience
right.
through their words. That's a powerful thing, and I'm excited that there's now a category where 5 poets are going to get a chance to be, placed in that kind of highlight that says this is an opportunity for me to tell my story to you, and move you in a certain way. And I think that's going to have an effect, obviously on the listeners and on other poets, but I think it's going to have an influence on the genre of poetry
Mhm,
as a thing. Not that it
mhm,
isn't. Obviously, it's a thing. But now what you're saying to a grander audience is that we think it's a thing too. We want you to listen to it. I think there's going to be more people who want to be poets. I think there's going to be more people who want to listen to poetry. I think there are going to be more poetry albums. I think there are going to be more opportunities for people to say, this is a thing that I didn't know. You remember when hip hop started and that caught
yes,
on, and
mhm,
how at first it was questionable in some circles, but now it's enduring. Now it is a staple of our way of entertaining ourselves, enlightening ourselves,
right.
challenging ourselves, and I think poetry is on the way.
I am glad that you have expressed your vision because that's how it's going to come to pass. People have to collectively believe this and will it into being. Because it was a long time that it took for this category to be, approved by, the board of directors and stuff.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of lobbying and a lot of commitment on a lot of people's part to say this is an enduring art form and we need to be supporting it in a more meaningful way. I I I absolutely think that you are one of the premier poets of our time, and I love that your commitment to poetry is not just, I'm going to, write a book a year or write 100 poems a year, but it's your personal love for words. I think one of the things you kind of said it before, but I when I read a poem and I'm moved by it, I think part of the reason why I am moved by it is like, wow, whether it's a new perspective, but it's like somebody feels something and they've made me feel that something through
Yeah.
these words. And that is so powerful and so awesome. And you know, you have to be gifted in order to be able to do it. And you are absolutely supreme. It's because like I said, I will be flying through my social media, a poem that you posted will come out, and it'll stop me in my tracks, and I'll have to read it, and sometimes, not always, I let you know, but I gotta let you know that now in front of all these people that more times than not, that when I haven't written you, I have been touched and moved by your words.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for this time. In poetry, I'm grateful for this category. I'm excited for other poets.
Yeah,
Because I think this is even for people who don't even realize that they are poets.
yeah,
They haven't self-identified yet, and I think one of the things that's exciting about that is that it exposes more people to this as an option of expression, and look, let's be honest with it. Awards are a way of legitimizing things.
yes,
It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody always agrees, but there's a certain consensus that happens. But outside of that, what the consensus is, from right now from the Recording Academy, is that spoken word poetry is a thing that we want more people to listen to, you
that's
know?
right. That's
And
right.
so I'm super excited about that. And, certainly would love to be, one of the first to get nominated and win that, that goes without saying. But regardless of that, I'm excited for poets. I'm excited for poetry in general. I'm excited for the audience to have a new thing to be excited about themselves.
Yeah, that is. Well, I'm excited that you're excited. No,
Yeah.
well, I want to thank you for coming and chilling with me on a Saturday afternoon. We're doing it coast to coast. I'm here in Miami. You're in LA,
I
and
am.
um, it is it's great to see you in person. We've been doing a lot of phone
I
stuff.
know, huh?
A lot of us have gotten zoomed out, but I think I'm good now. Now that I it's not the only way that I get to communicate with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
cool. But
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I always love talking to you. So it's good to be able to see you, for a
yeah,
change, because it's been a minute
for
since we've seen
sure.
each other in person.
Yep.
But yeah, I always love our conversations, and I appreciate you greatly.
Well, come next spring, we're gonna be doing some very cool things, probably in Los Angeles with poetry, and I
Yeah.
will be inviting you to participate because people need to hear your words.
Well, I appreciate that. And I look forward to it as well.
All right, and with that, we're wrapped.